Honourable colleagues, as a senator from Saskatchewan and Treaty 4 territory, I rise to speak to Senator Cardoza's inquiry regarding the future of the CBC Radio Canada. The CBC is far more than a public broadcaster. It is Canada's national public broadcaster, serving Canadians for over 85 years. In many ways, it connects us across our vast and diverse federation. Sadly, there are some that propose to defund this cherished national institution, and I don't agree with that proposal. Let us first understand what the CBC truly represents. Canada has a breathtaking geographical expanse. From the rocky shores of Newfoundland, it's something like Manning taught me, Newfoundland, to the towering rainforests of BC, from the wine-swept Arctic tundra to the majestic Great Lakes, from the golden plains of Saskatchewan to the snowy peaks of Alberta. Across this great country, the CBC serves as a critical communication bridge. Our public broadcaster reaches the most remote corners of our country and connects our Canadian family. Consider the unique challenges of Canadian media. Where commercial broadcasters see no economic incentive, the CB steps in and steps up. It provides a comprehensive coverage in both official languages and 8 Indigenous languages, ensuring that the communities which might otherwise be voiceless have a platform in northern and rural regions. CBC isn't just about entertainment, it's about survival, connection, and cultural preservation. During emergencies, whether a winter storm in Labrador or a wildfire in the Yukon, the CBC becomes essential infrastructure. When cell networks fail, CBC radio waves continue to carry vital information, potentially saving lives. But the CBC's importance extends far beyond emergency communication. It's a cultural cornerstone. As the largest commissioner of original Canadian content, it drives our creative sector. Think of classic CB shows over the years: The Beachcombers, Road to Avonlea, Street Legal, North of 60, The Nature of Things, Schitt's Creek, Kim's Convenience, and Heartland. Without the CBC, would these stories have been told? On CBC Radio 1, think of As It Happens, The Current, Cross Country Checkup, Quirks and Quarks, Q, Unreserved, Reclaimed, and Massey Lectures. On Radio Canada, think of a show that has no comparison with Tout le monde en parle. Consider the importance of a CBC political comedy to Canadians over the years. On Royal Canadian Air Force, every New Year's Eve, the chicken cannon blasted politicians of all stripes with equal opportunity satire, not to mention disgusting goo. Rick Mercer's reign on CBC makes Charles our country's second king in recent years. Out of Halifax, this hour has 22 minutes, is currently experiencing a golden age, with Chris Wilson impersonating both Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the Honourable Pierre Poilievre. The CBC's annual budget of $1.8 billion anchors an information and creative economy, contributing $72.9 billion to our economy and providing jobs for at least 630,000 Canadians in large and small communities alike. Defunding the CBC would be a mistake. It would create an irreplaceable void in our national communication ecosystem and our Canadian soul. Perhaps what should be considered is a turnaround recovery strategy. Critics argue that CBC should only do what private media won't. This market failure view fundamentally misunderstands the purpose of public broadcasting. While private media aim to generate profit, public broadcasters serve the public good. The CBC doesn't just fill gaps, it creates a shared national experience. Consider how the CBC connects us. A farmer in Manitoba, a hunter in Nunavut, an artist in Montreal, a lobster fisherman in PI. And if Senator Carter were here, I'd let him know that they do ship live lobsters. A Starbucks customer in Toronto. Through CBC programming, they all discover what we have in common as Canadians, including our charter values and sense of humor. They hear stories reflecting their experiences while gaining insights into the lives of their fellow Canadians. Still Standing, a comedy and reality series that travels across Canada to discover the hidden gems, rich heritage, and culture in small towns. Internationally, through Radio Canada International, the CBC serves as a bridge to the world. It connects Canadians abroad, promotes our culture globally, and helps attract talent and investment to our country. Philosopher John Ralston Saul aptly notes that public broadcasting remains. It remains one of the most important remaining levers that a nation-state has to communicate with itself. In an era of increasing media fragmentation, misinformation, conspiracy theories, and worse, disinformation, the CBC stands as a trusted source of reliable, fact-based reporting. Does this mean CBC is perfect? No. It faces significant challenges: funding constraints, technological disruption, and changing media consumption habits. Canada's media industry, with CBC as a dominant player, is currently grappling with an increasing trust deficit. According to Reuters Institute, trust in media has reached its lowest point in 7 years. Moreover, research from Spark Advocacy in April revealed that 45% of Canadians support the idea of shutting down CBC to save taxpayers' dollars. Even more troubling, 40% believe that CBC News functions as propaganda, with younger Canadians being more likely than older generations to share this perception. CBC's audience metrics add to this picture of declining trust and engagement. The broadcaster's own third quarter report for 22-23 highlighted that CBC television underperformed against its targets as viewership and total audiences fell. Similarly, CBC radio, digital reach, digital engagement, visits to children's content, and regional digital news engagement all failed to meet targets. These declines indicate broader challenges in retaining and growing audiences in an increasingly fragmented media landscape. An even more alarming trend is the hostility CBC journalists face, both online and in person. The Ombudsman's annual report for 21-22 described this year as the most contentious on record, with complaints soaring by 60% compared to the previous year. The tone and intensity of these complaints have become increasingly vitriolic, underscoring the fraught relationship between the public and the national broadcaster. These trends beg the question, what has gone wrong? Among the most common criticism is the perception of political bias. Many Canadians believe CBC has become a mouthpiece for the Liberal government, which undermines its fairness and independence. Addressing these concerns will require greater transparency, particularly in how CBC interacts with the government and manages its resources. By openly reporting on its inner workings, including programming decisions and spending, the CBC could rebuild public confidence. Another significant issue is groupthink within CBC. Critics argue that the broadcaster exhibits a left-leaning bias, which stems from a lack of diversity in backgrounds and opinions across its workforce. With many people coming from urban, university-educated, and progressive political circles, newsrooms risk becoming echo chambers that fail to reflect Canada's diverse viewpoints. This dynamic is compounded by labour practices. According to a Toronto Metropolitan University review, CBC employs over 2,000 temporary or contract workers daily, roughly a quarter of its workforce. This reliance on precarious labour creates financial instability and discourages dissenting voices, which stifles journalistic integrity and weakens democracy. Despite these challenges, CBC's problems are not insurmountable. They demand a robust turnaround recovery strategy to take a good look around, focus on self-reflection and strategic reform, including meaningful responsiveness to any valid criticisms. I strongly believe that defunding is not the answer. There's many external and internal issues that need to be assessed. They need to build on CBC's strengths, cultivate its competitive advantages, reinvest in themselves, and make deep transformation. While the immediate economic threats to Canadian media were temporarily mitigated by the passage of Online Streaming Act and Online News Act, structural changes remain. Broadcasters continue to face financial losses, and producers are seeing significant reductions in Canadian content commissions. Even if the industry stabilizes, the economics of Canada's small market often prioritize culturally even if the industry stabilizes, the economics of Canada's small market often prioritize culturally generic programming aimed at international audience rather than programming that which reflects the country's rich diversity and tells our Canadian stories. Perhaps the greatest threat to CBC is not political or economic, but a lack of understanding about its broader purpose. Public broadcasting should be recognized as a service for the public good, not merely as a gap filler where private media falls short. If we fail to champion a vision, the conversation about CBC's future risks being dominated by private media interests, which may not prioritize the public good. Strategic reform and a renewed focus on CBC's core strengths and marketplace advantages could ensure its relevance and value to all Canadians. We need a CBC that continually adapts, with more transparent budget allocation, enhanced digital platforms, and a refined mandate that maintains its core public service mission. Every dollar invested in the CBC generates $2 back into our economy, particularly in regions that commercial media would never serve. Funding culture is not a luxury. It's a necessity for nation building and the vibrance of our connections to each other as Canadians. Great countries invest in institutions that preserve their performing arts, stories, languages, and values. Just look around Europe. The CBC is an investment in Canada's future and a distinct and unique identity, including with the ever-present influence of our good friends to the south. To those who would defund the CBC, I say this: you would be dismantling a critical piece of our national infrastructure and our identity. The CBC is fundamental to our federation. Ultimately, the future of our public broadcaster is up to Canadians. But as patriotic Canadians in this chamber, let's do our part to ensure that the future is bright and our pride is storied and inspiring. Instead of defund, let us choose to defend, reform, and strengthen the CBC, ensuring that it continues to inform, enlighten, and unite Canadians for generations to come. Our tax dollars should be on a robust turnaround strategy, not defunding and fire-selling assets of land, buildings, and equipment to private equity investors to economically repurpose for a lesser purpose. Thank you, merci, and hai kitatamahin.
Senator Rusakos, you have a
Senator
question?
Klyne, take a question.
Senator
Yes, I
Klyne, would you take a
considering
question?
that it was the TRCM that gave the edge to the media industry. Let's go.
I'm sorry, Senator Klyne, I didn't hear your answer.
I said I absolutely would. Especially
Okay,
from the
then Senator Rusakos, you have a
TRCM.
question.
Thank you, Senator Klyne, for sharing your thoughts on the subject matter. And as it turns out, we are in the midst right now, Transport and Communications, doing a short study on the CBC and regional services. And what we've discovered thus far in the review is that when it comes to providing regional services, and I agree that's probably the most critical mandate of the CBC, they've fallen short consistently over the last decade. They've been reducing budgets, they've been cutting services when it comes to regional services, minority language services, and so on and so forth, actually to the detriment of their licensing act of the Broadcasting Act. So one of the questions is, how do you square that circle where you have right now the CBC that for the last decade or more has been reducing services, making cutbacks, while that's supposed to be one of their core mandates? On the other front as well, the second question is, if you look at the CBC, trust is down, ratings are at a historic low, which means taxpayers are not watching this public broadcaster. The only two things that are up is their budget consistently over the last 9.5 years and executive bonuses. So when they've lost the public trust, and when ratings are such at a historic low level, how can we justify to taxpayers $1.4 billion of subsidies year in, year out?
Senator Senator Klyne, you only have 15 seconds, so do you ask do you ask extra time to answer the question?
I would love that, yeah.
Do we have an agreement?
Just 3 minutes is good. So we lost 3 minutes with Senator Housakis repeating just about everything I said in there. I agree there's a lot of things that are at loss, but you talked about many losses. They've lost the plot is what they've lost. And what they need to do is they need to get back to their purpose, and they need to look at the shareholders' values, attitudes, and beliefs. They need to figure out who their audiences are and what their audiences want, and where they need to build on their strengths and cultivate their competitive advantages. They need to look at all the external issues that are plotting against or that they have to work against, because that's where they're going to identify where the threats and opportunities are. They need to look at their internal issues, and that's where they're going to find where their strengths and weaknesses are. And they need to come up with alternative strategies based on all that analysis and come up with the breakthrough strategy. And that is going to come through a recovery turnaround strategy, and I have every confidence that that would happen. And through that, there has to be a lot of communication with all levels. But they're going to lose some jobs. They're going to gain some audiences. And I would think that they would know their audiences better than anybody else. And if somebody wants to reach a certain age of a demographic, they'll say, we have just the show for you, and this is where we're going to place your advertising. That's all I got to say.